They had called her useless, long before they ever said the word rejected. Lyra learned the shape of that truth early, the way voices dropped when she entered a room, the way elders sighed as though she were a problem that refused to solve itself. In Silverpine Pack, Omegas were not meant to be loud, but they were meant to be something. Healers, nurturers, bearers of new bloodlines, silent pillars that kept the pack from collapsing inward. Lyra had never found her place among those expectations. She did not shift easily. She did not carry the warm authority others spoke about in hushed reverence. She only had her eyes, observant, wide, always watching the world that seemed determined to forget her. The rejection came at dawn, which was cruel in its own way. Night would have hidden the shame, morning stripped it bare. She stood before the council in a thin wool cloak that had once belonged to her mother, fingers digging into the frayed seams, while the Alpha spoke with the distant patience, reserved for problems that had already been solved in someone else's mind. "You were given years," he said. "The pack cannot keep waiting for you to become what you are not." Lyra did not argue. She had learned that words bounced off decisions like rain off stone. By the time she crossed the outer gates, frost was already crawling along the earth. She did not know where she was meant to go, only that staying was no longer allowed. Snow drifted lazily between the dark pines, soft and deceptive, hiding the bite of winter beneath beauty. She walked until the pack's stone walls became a memory, and her breath was the only sound she could trust. That was when she saw it. A white shape between the trees. At first she thought it was exhaustion playing tricks on her vision, a smear of moonlight caught in motion. Then the figure stepped forward, solidifying into a wolf whose fur was so pale it seemed to glow against the dark forest. Its eyes were a clear, icy blue that held neither hunger nor fear, only attention. Lyra stopped. So did the wolf. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Snow settled on its back like scattered stars. The forest hushed around them, as though the world itself were waiting to see which of them would break the spell first. "Are you real?" she whispered, voice thin in the cold. The wolf tilted its head. It did not growl. It did not bare its teeth. It simply turned and walked away, not disappearing, not rushing, but moving with deliberate slowness that made its intention unmistakable. "Follow me." Lyra did not know why she obeyed. Maybe it was because she had nowhere else to go. Maybe it was because the wolf did not look at her the way the pack had, not as a burden, not as something broken, but as if she were a presence that mattered enough to be guided. She followed the white wolf into the forest, unaware that every step behind it was leading her toward a power the pack had never imagined she could hold. The white wolf never looked back. That was the strangest part of following it, the quiet certainty in its gait, as though it trusted Lyra to keep up even though she had never been trusted with anything else. Snow crunched softly beneath her boots as she threaded her way through narrow paths that did not feel like paths at all, only places where the forest leaned aside just enough to let them pass. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Birdsong faded, wind dulled. Even the restless creak of winter branches softened into a kind of listening silence. Lyra felt it in her chest, a pressure that was not quite fear, not quite anticipation, more like the moment before you open a door you know will change you, even if you do not know how. She stumbled once, catching her balance on a low-hanging bough. When she straightened, the wolf had stopped. It stood a few paces ahead, pale fur gleaming faintly in the dim light filtering through pine needles, eyes fixed on her with the same calm awareness that had first drawn her in. "I'm not as strong as you think," Lyra said, the words spilling out of her before she could stop them. She did not know why she felt the need to justify herself to a creature that could not answer, but the forest had a way of loosening truths she had long kept locked inside. "They said I was weak, that I wasn't meant to stay." The wolf blinked. Then it turned and continued on, as though her confession had been not a plea but an understanding. Lyra followed, heart beating faster now, not with exhaustion, but with the strange, quiet certainty that the path ahead was not something she was meant to survive by force. It was something she was meant to listen to. The forest opened into a clearing she did not recognize. Moonlight pooled there in a perfect circle, unbroken by shadow, illuminating a ring of ancient stones half buried in snow. At the center lay a shallow pool, its surface unbroken by ice despite the cold. The white wolf stopped at the edge. It lowered its head, eyes reflecting the silver glow of the clearing. Lyra stepped closer, drawn by the warmth radiating from the water like a heartbeat beneath the earth. She knelt, brushing her fingers across the surface, and gasped. The water was not merely warm. It was alive. A current thrummed against her skin, sending a shock of sensation up her arm and into her chest, where something she had never felt before stirred awake. "What is this place?" she whispered. The wolf lifted its head and met her gaze, and for the first time since she had left the pack behind, Lyra did not feel like she was being tested. She felt like she was being welcomed. Lyra did not remember deciding to stand. One moment she was kneeling at the edge of the strange, warm pool, fingers tingling where they brushed the water's surface. The next, her body lifted of its own accord, drawn upright by a pull that did not come from muscle or will, but from something deeper, a thread that seemed to stretch from the center of her chest to the heart of the clearing itself. The white wolf stepped aside. It did not retreat. It simply moved with the fluid grace of something relinquishing a role it had been waiting to pass on. The stones around the pool began to glow faintly, not with light but with presence, an awareness that slid beneath Lyra's skin and made her breath hitch. She was not afraid. She realized this with distant surprise, the way one notices an old habit has finally broken. She walked into the pool. The water closed around her ankles, her calves, her knees, not cold, not heavy, but welcoming, like a long-held breath finally released. The warmth spread upward, threading through her veins, settling in places she had not known were empty. Images bloomed behind her eyes. A girl standing alone beneath falling snow, watching a white wolf disappear into the trees. A forest bending toward her in quiet acknowledgement. Circles of wolves gathering not in dominance, but in recognition of something they had been waiting to see again. She gasped as the water reached her waist. "You were never meant to disappear," a voice seemed to say, not in sound, but in sensation, in the way the pool remembered every quiet soul who had ever knelt here in disbelief. Lyra pressed her hands into the water, bracing herself as another wave of warmth surged through her. She felt something uncoil inside her, a fear she had carried so long it had begun to feel like identity, loosening its grip. The white wolf watched from the stones, its blue eyes reflecting not her smallness but her becoming. When the water reached her chest, she felt it then, the pulse beneath her skin, echoing the rhythm of the pool. It was not magic as the pack had taught her to understand it. It was not dominance or spectacle. It was presence. She had been quiet not because she lacked power, but because she carried a kind that did not need to shout. Lyra sank deeper until the water touched her shoulders, then stopped, not because she feared drowning, but because she knew instinctively that this was enough. The pool was not asking for her to vanish into it. It was asking her to remember herself. When she stepped back onto the stones, her clothes dripping, the cold no longer bit. Snow did not cling to her skin. She felt as though she carried a hearth inside her chest, a warmth that did not burn but endured. The white wolf approached her then, bowing its head not in submission but in recognition. And Lyra, once rejected for her silence, realized she had been following this wolf not toward escape, but toward herself. Silverpine did not notice Lyra's absence until it began to feel her presence. That was the cruel irony of it, how someone could vanish from a place and only then reveal how deeply they had been woven into it. The pack's morning routine stumbled first. Healers misjudged herbs that had always responded to steady hands. Patrol routes blurred at the edges, wolves doubling back along paths they had walked since youth, convinced they had missed something important. The elders called it winter fatigue. The hunters called it distraction. But beneath the words lay a restlessness none of them could name. The Alpha stood at the highest balcony of Silverpine's central keep, watching frost creep across the training grounds in patterns that did not obey the wind. His wolf stirred uneasily beneath his skin, hackles lifting without cause, as though the forest itself had shifted its weight. "She was not meant to matter this much," he muttered, though he had not spoken Lyra's name aloud since the day she crossed the gates. Yet the land remembered. At the far edges of the territory, wolves paused mid-step, ears tilting toward the trees as if listening for a call that carried no sound. Pups woke crying from dreams they could not describe. Even the old stone wells hummed faintly, water trembling in their depths as though responding to a pulse moving outward through the soil. That pulse did not feel like threat. It felt like home. The Alpha dismissed the scouts who brought him reports of strange animal movements, deer clustering in unusual herds, ravens circling the same grove for hours without landing. These were not omens he had been trained to heed. His authority had been forged in battle, in blood, in the simple equation of dominance. Quiet things had never unsettled him before. But by midday, he could no longer ignore the ache beneath his ribs, the sensation of something slipping beyond his grasp without ever having belonged to him in the first place. He ordered a patrol to the western forest, toward the paths Lyra had taken when she left. He told himself it was to ensure she had not become a danger, that it was his duty as Alpha to guard the pack from unpredictable elements. He did not tell himself the truth, that he wanted to understand why the forest felt larger without her in it. Miles away, Lyra stood at the edge of the moonlit clearing, the white wolf at her side, feeling the same pulse ripple outward like breath. She did not know the pack was listening. She only knew that something she had woken was no longer hers alone. The Alpha had tracked wolves across half a dozen territories in his lifetime. He knew the difference between fresh prints and false leads, between the restless scatter of prey and the deliberate lines carved by a pack on the move. So when he left Silverpine behind with 2 scouts at his back, he did not expect to lose the trail within the first hour. Yet that was exactly what happened. Lyra's footprints had been swallowed by snow long before they reached the forest's deeper folds, but something else had taken their place, a path that was not quite visible, not quite physical. It threaded between the trees in a way that made the Alpha's wolf bristle beneath his skin, a sensation of following rather than leading, of being drawn by something he could not name. "Do you feel that?" one of the scouts asked quietly, slowing to match his pace. The Alpha did not answer. He did not trust his voice to carry authority in a forest that was already undermining it. They moved deeper until the trees thinned and the ground beneath their boots grew strangely warm. The snow did not melt, yet it no longer numbed the feet, a subtle, unsettling contradiction that made the Alpha's pulse stutter. Then they heard it. Not a howl. A presence. The scouts stopped short at the edge of a clearing neither of them remembered existing. Moonlight pooled at its center in a perfect circle, illuminating a ring of ancient stones that seemed to hum faintly beneath the snow. And there, at the far side of the clearing, stood a white wolf. It did not snarl when it saw them. It did not flee. It looked through them, eyes pale as frost and just as impossible to touch. The Alpha stepped forward despite himself. "Lyra," he called, the name tasting unfamiliar after days of silence. The clearing did not answer. But the forest did. The air thickened, pressing against his chest like the memory of a bond he had once known how to carry. His scouts faltered, hands drifting to their weapons without realizing it, while the Alpha stood rooted to the edge of the moonlit ring, suddenly aware that this place did not belong to him. The white wolf took one step back, not in fear but in dismissal. Then it vanished between the trees, leaving behind a warmth that did not fade with its absence. The Alpha did not follow. For the first time in his life, instinct told him that to cross that threshold would be to admit something he was not yet ready to understand. Lyra did not feel like she was leaving the clearing. She felt as though the forest were unfolding with her at its center, the path between the ancient stones and Silverpine bending gently into existence where none had been before. The white wolf walked beside her, its pale fur catching glints of early light that filtered through the trees like scattered promises. Her footsteps no longer crunched against frozen ground. The snow yielded without complaint, shaping itself around her boots as if it recognized the rhythm of her movement. With each step, the warmth beneath her skin settled more firmly into place, not a blaze, not a rush, but a steady, enduring presence that made the cold feel irrelevant. She passed through places she had never seen before, yet none of them felt unfamiliar. Moss-covered boulders leaned toward her like old friends. Streams whispered her name in a language she did not know she understood. Even the birds watched her with eyes that held more curiosity than caution. When the white wolf slowed, she did too. Silverpine emerged between the branches like a memory she had almost outgrown, stone walls rising above frost-dusted pines, banners stirring weakly in the breeze. It was still her pack. It just no longer defined her. The wolf stopped at the tree line. It did not come closer to the gates. "This is where you leave me," Lyra said, surprised by the absence of sadness in her voice. The white wolf turned its head slightly, eyes bright with something that felt like affirmation rather than farewell. Then it faded into the forest, dissolving not into nothingness, but into everywhere. Lyra stepped forward alone. Guards stiffened at the sight of her, confusion rippling through their postures as though they were seeing a reflection that no longer matched the person they had escorted out days before. She did not bow her head. She did not hurry. She walked. By the time she reached the central courtyard, a crowd had formed, warriors lingering at the edges of training rings, omegas peering from archways, elders rising from their carved seats with the instinctive certainty that something had returned which did not belong to old rules. The Alpha stood at the heart of the gathering, his expression unreadable. "You left without permission," he said, though there was no anger in his voice, only uncertainty. Lyra met his gaze. "I followed a wolf," she replied simply. A murmur passed through the pack. The Alpha inhaled sharply, as if he had expected denial and been handed truth instead. "And what did it give you?" Lyra did not answer with words. She closed her eyes. The warmth beneath her skin lifted gently, spreading outward not as light, but as presence. A subtle change in the air that made wolves straighten unconsciously. That made the courtyard seem to widen around her as if the space itself were making room. The pack felt it. They did not know what it was. They only knew they had lost something long ago, and it was standing before them now. Silverpine had always believed that strength announced itself. It arrived with the crack of bone in training yards, with the thunder of hooves during the seasonal hunts, with the sharp authority of an alpha's command ringing across the valley. Quiet had been tolerated, even protected, but it had never been trusted. Until Lyra stood in the courtyard and did nothing at all. The warmth she carried did not flare or glow. It did not demand attention. It settled instead into the spaces between wolves, into the restless pauses and half-finished gestures that filled the pack's daily life. Warriors shifted their weight, not in challenge, but in something closer to instinctive alignment, as if the invisible field around her were gently rethreading them into a pattern they had forgotten how to recognize. The Alpha watched her with a frown that was not anger. It was recalibration. "You claim a wolf led you here?" he said at last. Lyra nodded, "Not to take me away, to return me." Murmurs rose and fell, voices tangling with unease and curiosity. A few Omegas stepped closer without realizing they had moved at all, their eyes fixed on Lyra with an intensity that surprised them. It was not envy they felt, nor hope exactly. It was memory. An elder leaned heavily on her staff. "What did you wake?" she asked, her voice rasped thin by years of authority that had learned to harden itself. Lyra hesitated. How did one name a thing that had never been part of the pack's language? "I didn't wake it," she said slowly. "I remembered it." She described the clearing, the stones, the pool that was warm in the heart of winter, the way the forest had bent around her like breath learning itself for the first time. She spoke without embellishment, not because she wished to sound believable, but because the truth did not require decoration. The Alpha felt his wolf stir. Not in challenge, in recognition. When Lyra fell silent, the courtyard did not fill with debate the way it usually did. No one rushed to contradict her. The pack stood suspended in the unfamiliar experience of not needing to resolve something immediately. A young warrior stepped forward, then stopped uncertain. "When you were gone," he said, rubbing the back of his neck as though embarrassed by the admission, "I couldn't sleep, not properly. I kept thinking I was missing something." Others murmured agreement. Lyra closed her eyes, letting the warmth in her chest drift outward just enough to touch the edges of the gathering. It did not command them to gather. It invited. And the pack, so used to being pushed, leaned in for the first time. No one saw the white wolf arrive. There was no alarm raised from the watchtowers, no startled cry from the gate guards, no rush of paws on stone to announce that something unfamiliar had crossed Silverpine's borders. It was simply there, present in the way only the forest ever managed to be, not forcing itself into awareness, but reshaping it from the inside out. Lyra felt the shift before she saw it. The warmth she carried, which had settled into her chest like a hearth that never dimmed, altered its rhythm. Not stronger, not brighter, deeper. Like a river turning beneath still water. Her breath slowed without conscious thought, and when she lifted her gaze toward the western tree line, the pack followed her attention as though drawn by a shared instinct they did not yet understand. There, between frost-laced trunks, pale fur caught the morning light. The white wolf stood at the forest's edge, its coat neither shimmering nor dull, but holding the clean, impossible clarity of fresh snow under a clear sky. Its eyes were the same soft blue Lyra had followed into the unknown, eyes that had never asked her to be anything other than what she was. The sight of it tightened her throat with something that was not quite gratitude and not quite grief. The Alpha took an involuntary step forward. He had faced border wars and rogue challengers, had knelt in bloodied snow before rival kings, and never once felt smaller for it. Yet standing now in the quiet courtyard with the pack gathered behind him, he felt as though the white wolf were measuring something he had never known how to name. It did not snarl. It did not bare its teeth or lower its head in deference. It simply witnessed. Lyra moved a fraction closer to the forest, enough that the pack saw the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders aligned, the way her presence seemed to soften the air rather than claim it. The warmth in her chest radiated outward not in waves but in invitation, threading through the gathered wolves with the ease of breath-finding lungs. "I didn't understand what it meant when I followed you," she murmured, her words carried more to herself than to the pack. "I thought you were leading me away." The white wolf's ears flicked. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, remembering the warmth of the pool, the sensation of something uncoiling inside her that had never been broken, only forgotten. She had not been remade in the forest. She had been returned to something Silverpine had slowly unlearned. "I thought power was something you took," she said more clearly now. "I thought it was a sound you made, a command you spoke loud enough that others could not ignore you." A murmur rippled through the pack, not in disagreement but in recognition too sharp to deny. "But you never spoke to me," Lyra continued, her gaze still fixed on the white wolf. "You didn't demand anything, you just showed me a place where I didn't have to disappear to belong." The Alpha swallowed. He had never known what to say to quiet wolves. He had learned to speak the language of force, to translate fear into obedience, urgency into command. And yet here, with the pack standing in a circle that had formed without instruction, he felt that language slipping out of his grasp. "What happens now?" he asked. Lyra turned back toward him. For the first time since she had returned, her eyes softened not with deference but with understanding. "Now I don't hold this alone," she replied. "That's what you showed me." The white wolf bowed its head then. Not to her, not to the Alpha, to the space between them, where the pack had begun to remember itself. The gesture was small, nearly unnoticeable, and yet it struck the courtyard with the weight of a turning season. Wolves leaned forward unconsciously, paws scuffing stone as though the earth beneath them had shifted its center. The white wolf stepped backward. It did not retreat, it did not flee. It dissolved into the forest the way mist dissolved into morning, leaving behind no tracks, no echo of departure, only the absence of something that had never meant to stay. Lyra exhaled slowly. The warmth in her chest did not fade. It did not dim or scatter. It settled instead into the pack like an unspoken vow, threading itself into the spaces between them where habit had long replaced attention. One Omega moved closer. Then another. Not because Lyra had called them, not because the Alpha had signaled, but because the space around her felt like the place they had once known how to stand before they were taught to shrink. A young warrior stepped forward hesitantly, eyes flicking toward the Alpha as though expecting rebuke. The Alpha did not move. "Something feels different," the warrior said, and then flushed as though embarrassed by his own honesty. "It's like we've been holding our breath." Others nodded. The elders did not speak, but they did not leave. Lyra felt the shift in her bones, not the weight of responsibility, but the relief of no longer being alone with something she had never asked to carry. "This isn't about me," she said quietly. "It never was." The courtyard held its silence. The Alpha took a breath that did not come from his chest, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere the forest had touched when he had failed to listen. "You were never weak," he said at last. Lyra did not contradict him. She did not need to. The white wolf was gone, but what it had left behind was not absence. It was possibility, not loud, not triumphant, but steady in the way forests were steady even after storms tore through them. Silverpine did not change that day. Not in ceremony, not in decree. It changed in the small ways that mattered more. In the way Omegas lifted their eyes when Lyra passed, in the way warriors paused before speaking, as if listening for something beneath their own voices. And Lyra, once rejected for following a wolf no one else could see, stood at the center of it all not as a ruler, but as a reminder of what the pack had always been capable of carrying.